So members, just for the record, in relation to the um, that application, we have um, yeah, it's LA 11 2019 0769, for an outline application for a new dwelling adjacent to and northwest of 32 Bearmore Road, Castleberg. The committee have um, decided to approve, taken a decision to approve that application on the basis of CTY 6, subject to conditions. So just to read that for the record in open business. So that application has been approved. I'm going to move on now to Appendix 6. We just have to, can we give a minute until we've got the relevant speakers and interested parties in the chamber?
Can I just thank everybody?
Members, our next application is LA 11 2019 0133F. It's a proposed dwelling and domestic garage on land adjacent to 60A Scraggy Road, Killen, Castleberg. And it's John that's taking us through this.
Thank you, Chair. So, LA 11 2019 0133F, proposed dwelling and domestic garage on land adjacent to 60A Scraggy Road, Killen, Castleberg, and the recommendation is to refuse. So this is a proposal for a farm dwelling on an agricultural field which comprises improved rush grassland. It's in the rural area to the south of Killen. It's in an undulating landscape which is kind of characterized by single dwellings and farms. You can see there to the north of the site is a house, number 60A, another house, number 60, with farm buildings to the rear, and beyond that the Blacktown Arms. It's probably not very clear, all that detail from the plan, but that's what lies to the north of the site. And there's some views of the site. So it's kind of on a corner there, and you can see from the photograph at the bottom how the application site fits into the wider area. You probably can't read the text there, but it's in the report. But that text on the right above the hedge, that says application site. That's where the site is, just to the right of that dwelling on the corner. This is a site layout plan, proposed plans and elevations. You can see from the elevations there on the right that it would be quite a substantial two-storey dwelling. And this is the policy framework that we've considered, which is the Strabane Area Plan, the Strategic Planning Policy Statement, and the various PPSs. Planning Policy Statement 2, Natural Heritage, PPS 3, Access, Movement and Parking, and Familiar Territory, PPS 21, Sustainable Development in the Countryside. So that's the main focus for us, really, the last one there. And the most important policy is policy CTY10 of PPS 21, which deals with farm dwellings. The farm is active and established, so there's no issue there. No dwellings or development opportunities outside the development limits have been sold off from this farm within 10 years of the date of application, so that part is okay. There have been no recent planning applications from our history search. The main issue for us, I'll flip back to plan. We consider that the site is not visually linked or clustered with an established group of buildings on the farm business. The land to the north has a number of buildings on it. Immediately to the north, that is number 60A, which was a replacement dwelling, and the dwelling it replaced is to the north there, which is another rare instance where it's been retained, and to the rear of it is the farm buildings. But the issue is that these are connected with a different farm business, not the applicant's farm business, and the policy says that it needs to be visually linked or clustered with an established group of buildings on the farm. The applicant has said that they do use those buildings. I think the landowner is actually the applicant's brother, but it is in a separate ownership. And the policy does not say that it's acceptable to group with buildings on a neighbouring farm. There are no other buildings on the farm, and the applicant has not made a case that this should be considered as an exceptional case to consider an alternative site. And in any case, it would not meet CTY 13, which is the policy that talks about integration in the countryside. So they were asked to consider an alternative site, but did not wish to progress that, so they're continuing to look at this site. In terms of policy CTY8, which deals with ribbon development, officers contend that this would actually add to a ribbon, contrary to policy CTY8. From Achamore Road, it would be very prominent, and loss of vegetation will make the site very open. There's some existing trees on the frontage there, but they would have to be taken out. It would be a 1 3/4 story dwelling as shown, and it is our view that that would have a suburban appearance. Due to its scale and mass and location and design, we consider it would be unacceptable and will not integrate, contrary to policy CTY 13, and it would rely primarily on new landscaping and vegetation for integration. It would cause a suburban style build-up of development contrary to policy CTY 14, harming the rural character of the area. There's a little summary there of the consultation responses. I'll leave it up on the screen. I don't intend to go into any detail on that because there aren't any particular issues for us there in terms of reasons for refusal. Very much in brief, the Natural Environment Division of NIEA requested an amended site plan because part of the red line area is within a priority habitat, which is peatland, but they are now content because a revised site plan was submitted to take it away from that area. So generally consultees were content, subject to conditions. So I've already summarised them, but there are the refusal reasons set out in detail. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. Can I invite Turlock Gurley to address the committee? You're very welcome, Mr. Gurley. And I just want to thank you for your patience. I think we all anticipated that we would have get through. We would have reached this application a lot sooner, but I think some of the earlier applications sort of merited that further discussion. So I want to thank you for your patience, and you've 5 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, members, for your time as well. Just by way of background information, the applicant's father, Columba, has a farm of 98 acres on which he rears fat lambs, and the applicant would hope to take over the running farm upon his retirement. As the business involves rearing fat lambs, they're kept out on the land, and the only buildings needed are for storage of bales of hay for winter foddering. So he will take bales out of the shed that has been referred to the planning officer and give it out to the lambs out in the field morning and night. As a result, Columba, the applicant's father, has made use of the old farm buildings to the rear of the old replaced dwelling that was spoken about for many years. Although these were willed to Columba's brother Paddy, Paddy's farm and farm buildings are approximately half a mile away along the Scotty Road, and the buildings that we're relying on are detached from his farm, and he's no use for these buildings. They're outside his farm home. As they're adjacent to Columba's land, he was best positioned to make use of them, and he does, and he finds them quite useful. He has no other buildings on. He has no a group of farm buildings on his land, so he finds that quite useful to use them. So it's a practical situation where his land's immediately adjoining them. A letter has been submitted by Paddy, I think, as far as I'm aware, on the application confirming this arrangement is long-standing. And as I said, there's no group of buildings on Columba's land, so this is the only group you can make use of for this particular planning policy. And CTY 10 does facilitate dwellings on the farm in situations where there are no groups of buildings, as long as it complies with policy CTY 13, that's integration and design, and CTY 14, rural character, and also CTY 16 in terms of effluent disposal. The site is located on the largest portion of Columba's farm holding, which comprises of 70 acres of the total 90 acres that he farms. He has 2 other plots just slightly up the road, but this is the main chunk of land here, 70 acres of 98. It's located beside the buildings that are being used by Columba, and thus it makes sense for the dwelling to be positioned beside them. The proposed dwelling has been relocated down into a hollow or a dish from what was originally proposed. It's down in a dish in a hollow now in the land, which is a much lower level than the single-story replacement dwelling adjoining it, and it has the benefit of backdrop of that steeply rising land to the rear. of the site, as well as the backdrop of the existing group of buildings to the immediate north. And as you noted from the photographs, contained within the report, there's the screening along the frontage as well. The site also benefits from that strong line of trees along the frontage, the majority of which could be retained given the width of the grass verge. Some will have to come out, and the applicant is proposing to transplant these behind the visibility display, so that screening will be maintained as well, and that will be important for the view from the side road. Albeit you're coming up a steep hill and then you're at the junction, it's a very short, limited view that will help that view then. And again, from that position, you're looking into the hill and the dwelling is set against that steeply rising ground. As I said, the views are very limited and short term. There's additional landscaping proposed as well to augment what's there. And when you're travelling along the Scotty Road from the north, you'll be past the site before you notice it. You come from the Blacktown Arms, from the Killen direction, go around the corner and you're away, and you wouldn't even notice it, particularly if that vegetation can be retained. And then travelling the other direction from the south towards Killen, you will read it. It will be filtered, the view, again, it's a short-term view. It'll be filtered by the hedgerow and the trees that can be retained along the frontage. It will read against the group of buildings to the immediate north, and will also read against the steeply rising hill. So from that perspective, I'm of the opinion that it complies with policy CTY 13 in terms of integration, providing backdrop screening, and also importantly, it clusters with the group of buildings to the immediate north, and that complies then with CTY 14 in terms of using groups of buildings to integrate buildings into the countryside, and clustering them obviously has a less visual impact than buildings being scattered across the countryside. So it's in the keeping with the thrust of the policy of PPS 21. Given the exposed nature of the landscape in this area, it's considered that the grouping of the dwelling with the existing group of buildings would be more appropriate in visual terms than the location of a dwelling away from the group of buildings on another part of the farm, particularly as a lot of that farm is quite elevated upland. It's sort of that transitional area between good farmland and mountain farmland, so it's quite open and exposed. So the natural location would be is to put it here, to group it with buildings, and that will kill the visual impact. It's read with the buildings rather than standing on its own and it's spreading the build-up of development in the area. Again, the design of the dwelling, the members saw it there. It's a straightforward story and a half dwelling. There's a lot of vernacular features. It's quite reflective of the traditional form, and in terms of its design, I think it's quite appropriate for the rural area. Again, as I said, it's been brought down off the height down into the hollow at a much more lower level than the single-story dwelling. So it should read at something similar. And you can see there, if you look at the bottom photograph there, to the right of that, you can see the ground dropping off just before it falls behind the row of trees that I talk about along the frontage. Now, that photograph sort of gives impressions of bend there. It's just the way it's put together. That's a straight section of road there. So in terms of design and integration, I think it's quite appropriate in terms of how it sits into the landscape. I'm sorry, I'm moving stuff on the screen here. I realise. And obviously, there's no issue in terms of effluent CTY 16, so it meets all the three policies referred to in CTY 10. There was an alternative site suggested to the rear of the buildings, sort of close to the Blacktown Arms there, but it would involve the applicants sharing a shared lane, or making use of a shared lane, and driving around the rear of that dwelling, that single-story dwelling, which was the replacement for the old two-story dwelling at the roadside. And as members know, and it was alluded to in another application earlier, shared lanes cause a real problem for mortgages. So it's almost a no-no in terms of banks lending money in that sort of situation. And again, the location of this proposed dwelling behind the replacement bungalow has its own issues in terms of amenity for the rear of that dwelling. And it's not great that someone has to drive around the back of the house to get to another house. It's just not good planning. Sorry, just one more sentence and then I'll be finished. Thank you. So that alternative, it's in close proximity, as I said, to Blacktown Arms, and that has been raised as an issue for environmental health in terms of proximity. So in this situation, it's acceptable in terms of amenity, but the alternative would be locating it closer to the Blacktown Arms, and for those reasons, I don't think that the alternative site would be acceptable. And in fact, if there was buildings proposed in the farm, that would be an ideal location for the farm buildings tucked in behind the Blacktown Arms and the replacement dwelling. So from my perspective, I would have thought the appropriately designed dwelling in that hollow would be more appropriate there than on an elevated site at the rear of those buildings. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Mr. Gurley. Any questions, members? No. Alderman Kerrigan.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me in. I was just wondering, but I think you've kind of alluded to it anyway. You and again, I would not say nothing there. In relation to the type of the dwelling, that's my only issue there, because in those townlands of Edmershop and into Main Carriga there, you know, I know that area well. I'm not far from it. I would count there's 12 bungalows in that area. The only dwelling house that's larger than a bungalow is the the the, the replacement dwelling that has been left in the Blacktown car park, whereby this dwelling house here does appear from the plans here quite a large dwelling. You know, but are you content that that can be accommodated in there? Because I say, from my counting of the dwellings in that area, we have 12 bungalows, and that's by it looks quite large, to be fair. But have you any? I know you did allude to it, you were content you could, but just seems like quite a large dwelling, in my own opinion.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying there. The majority of built around there are bungalows, but this site is sitting in a hollow in addition to the landscape. That bungalow is at a much higher level. The ground rises, and the contour maps would show that on the site layout. The ground rises very steeply behind that house there, so it's tucked into the hill. It's set in a hollow, and in terms of integration, regardless of the design, so some people say a two-story house isn't acceptable, but it is acceptable if the site has the capacity to take it in terms of integration and screening and clustering with other buildings. And you have the Blacktown Arms, which is a fairly sizable building too, the pub that's there, and there are our agriculture buildings of fairly reasonable size around there too. So I suppose it's tying in with the buildings rather than just the bungalows around the area.
Councillor Gallagher.
Thank you. Just one question. Just how, and you might know, but do you see, you talked about the two brothers, two separates, and then you talked about the father.
Yeah.
How was it ever at one stage, going back, was it ever the one farm?
It probably wasn't one farm. As far as I'm aware, it was split between the two brothers. And the two-story dwelling and they're actually two-story buildings that the Columba uses for keeping hay and storage of farm items in. At the back of it, I think they were willed as part of the arrangement that Paddy got the home house, I suppose, and the buildings, but then he got the land and another farmyard up the road as well, and then Columba got the remaining part of the land. That's my understanding of it. And the difficulty then is Columba got the land with no buildings on it. So he has a sizable chunk of about 98 acres, but there's no buildings on it, so he can't comply with the policy of locating beside a group of buildings. So he's doing the next best thing to it, which is taking buildings that were part of the original farm holding and locating his dwelling beside that. And they're in use for his farm use, and they're not being used by Paddy. There's no use to Paddy because he has a farm group up the road, so they're completely detached from his land.
Members, any further questions? To Mr. Gurley? No. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, members.
Any questions to the officer? Councillor McKinney.
For John here. John, I'm just looking at figure 6, right? And I sort of, to me, I take it we were given that photograph, were we?
Sorry, should have clarified really. Turlock was right. It's the way that photograph has been put together that makes it look like it's on a corner. I shouldn't really have referred to it as being on a corner because it is a reasonably straight road. I think there's a bit of a bend in the road, which is why I was trying to flip back to the location map while Turlock was speaking, just to clarify the true situation. I think it's probably fair to say that it's a bit of a bend, but reasonably straight.
It's also showing as a single story bungalow.
Sorry?
Through me a bit when we're talking about being a two-story house.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the question there.
Any further questions for John, members? Councillor Maguire.
Knowing the area well, same as Councillor Kerrigan, I propose we don't accept the officer's recommendation. The CTY 8 urban development, but I would say it's just finishing off there because, you know, as was said, there could be farm dwellings there. There could be farm dwellings anywhere. CTY 10 Uh, the farm dwellings visually linked to the farm buildings where practicable, but again, this isn't practicable because there actually is no farm dwelling, so it can't really cluster to it. And this being the biggest holding, this will be the farmhouse. CTY 13, it's against a backdrop of that's a mountain up behind, that's part of the Bun Mountain. Up the back of that, and on the opposite side is the Hamor Mountains. So really, the only critical viewpoints would be from when you're coming from Cleater, and it's probably in the top of a Hamor Hill. Apart from that wee short gap when you go around the corner, where it is, where you will see it. And again, I would agree that it's rounding off it as a traditional farmhouse. So on that basis, Chair, and incorporating the Strabane area plan, the rural remainder part, I propose that we do not accept the officer's recommendation.
And again, along with that proposal, I'm assuming that comes along with standard conditions. Okay, is there any further comments or questions, members? No, there's a proposal on the floor which hasn't been seconded. Okay, there's a proposal on the floor from Councillor Maguire. They approve the application with the standard conditions, which is seconded by Councillor Kelly. Going to go into a vote if there's no further questions. No. All those in favour? All those against? Abstentions? So it's 10 for, 1 against and 2 abstentions. So that application has been approved. Members, just following, we are approaching the 4 hour mark, which is cut off for the planning committee meetings. But given we did have an extended break, and there has been a gap between each of the applications to accommodate the speakers in the green room, I'm going to allow the application to be presented, and hopefully we can get through it. There's no speakers along with this final application. So the final application is LA 11 2020 0221. It's an outline application for a new dwelling and domestic garage at lands adjacent to 97 Murdoch Road, Glenmornan. And John's going to take us through it.
Thank you, Chair. So this is, get it on the right slide first. Sorry about that. LA 11 2020 0221. Proposed site for a dwelling at lands adjacent to 97 Morlock Road, Glenmornan, with a new access onto Crocken Road, and the recommendation is to refuse. This is a site location plan. There's the red line. The site is adjacent to number 97 Morlock Road, which is to the west. The site is 0.8 hectares, so it's a large agricultural field, and the site is in the area of outstanding natural beauty. So this is a small rural hamlet, Glenmornan, which is to the northeast of Strabane, southeast of Artigarvan. And the site is shown in yellow there, just so you can see it clearly. The dotted line is the limit of development for Glenmornan, so you can see quite clearly that it is just outside the settlement development limits of the settlement. There were no letters of objection or support in terms of consultee responses, roads, NI water, environmental health all had no objection subject to condition. So here's a viewpoint of the site from the entrance to number 97. The site's indicated with an arrow there, which isn't very clear. This is that's the field there. In terms of policy, as I mentioned, it's in the open countryside. It's outside the rural settlement of Glenmornan. Therefore, these are the main policies that we would follow. There's the Strabane Area Plan, the SPPS, and of course PPS 21. In this case, the main policy there is CTY 8 ribbon development, and also the other supporting policy CTY 13, 14 and 15 to do with integration and design of buildings in the countryside, rural character, and the settlement of the setting of settlements. So this is an aerial photo of the site showing the large agricultural fields adjacent to the existing settlement. To approve a dwelling on this site would not only create a ribbon of development into the rural countryside, but would also mar the distinction between the settlement and the countryside, resulting in urban sprawl, and would therefore be contrary to policies CTY 8 and CTY 15 of PPS 21 and paragraph 6.71 of the SPPS. You'll notice from the photo there, that the houses to the north are already on very large residential plots, but please note when you're considering what weight you would attach to adding to this ribbon of development, that this is a very large plot. It would be almost twice the size again of those already very large residential plots to the north. There is a site photo showing a view from Crocken Road approaching Glenmornan. In terms of integration and rural character, the application site has also been considered against policy CTY 13 and 14 of PPS 21 in terms of impact on integration into the surrounding countryside and the rural character of the area. We consider that the site lacks long established natural boundaries, and a dwelling on this site would not satisfactorily integrate into the countryside. It would rely on new landscaping for integration primarily, contrary to the policy. Also, when added to the existing built development, a new dwelling would add to a ribbon of development along the Crocken Road and therefore have a detrimental impact on the rural character of the area. So I've added a slide here with the reasons for refusal, which are all from PPS 21, and I've already been through them, but I'll leave them up on the screen for you to look at. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. And as I've previously stated, members, there's no speakers in relation to this application, so we're straight on the questions to the officer. Any questions, members? Councillor Kelly.
Thanks, Chair. I do have a question in terms of the history of the site. I live not far from there, so I'm very familiar with that part of the world. So in terms of the long-established boundaries, it's not that long ago since the quarry on the site was restored to fields. So I suppose the presentation in terms of not having long established boundaries is kind of, it follows that if you have a quarry that's recently restored, you're not going to have long established boundaries. So I'm just making that point in terms of my own local knowledge. Also in terms of the development limits that were in the Strabane area plan, the current limits, I suppose a lot of that land has been developed, and the piece of land that's left, the parcels of land that are left along the river section now falls within the new flood maps. So some of that land that's currently zoned in the Strabane area plan is no longer available for development on the south side, and the land that's available around the chapel, I mean, umpteen developers have approached that farmer for that those fields, and it simply isn't for sale. So there's just in terms of my own knowledge, there's pressures there in terms of land availability within the development zone. There isn't the land that appears to be available in just looking at the map. So this is tucked in fairly tightly, you would have to say, to the current thing. It is outside the development line, that's I accept that, but I think the case in terms of what's available inside the development zone, the land that's left undeveloped is either not available or is no longer suitable in the main for development because of the new flood maps. Because of the change in the topography, so this site would have been a hill and it's now been lowered down flat. I think that also changes because I think there can be integration of a house. This is an outline plan and then it can be conditioned. So I think one house attached onto a rural area, and I also think in terms of the topography, because the valley is quite long and it's also quite steep, particularly as you go further east, the opportunities for development are lesser and lesser. So all in all, I do think it can be, I suppose maybe an exception, that this can be integrated in that site, and we could, under the plan, under the Strabane area plan, approve it, notwithstanding the policy reasons for refusal that were listed earlier.
Sorry, I'm just not sure what the question is. If there's something that you specifically wanted me
just in
to
terms of the site history.
To. Okay. Well, yeah.
In terms of the boundary definition? Yeah, well, you know, I suppose we're looking at the site now in terms of what it is now. It's restored. It's obviously all well restored, and vegetation clearly there. So, you know, we've looked at it on that basis, and we feel that that doesn't meet the integration test in terms of CTY 13. But I acknowledge the point that you're making in terms of its previous, or your local knowledge of it as being a quarry.
Point I'm making, Chair, is that I think the decrease in the land, because at the time that the area plan was being written and adopted, that was a hill. That hill is now gone, and I think you can, that particular corner of that field can accept a house without any impact into the countryside. It can be integrated, and I think because of the bend in the road, there's no views once you go further up the valley. Because a few meters along from where the entrance is, the road turns and it never turns back again, so you can't see that. And when you come in from the village side, the other houses are already there, so I don't accept, I suppose, it's a contrary opinion that I think it can be integrated. I think you could integrate a bungalow there easily, and perhaps even a story and a half house on that site without creating any sort of sense of ribboning out into the countryside. And I think just because of the way the road is, I don't think you're going to get any further houses further back, because you won't be able to get the sight lines. So I think that's the point I'm making. I think it can be taken forward as an exception just because of the circumstances on the ground.
Councillor Boyle.
Thanks, Chair. Well, actually, I have another example of when local knowledge is very useful, because going by what Councillor Kelly's saying, clearly the topography has changed significantly since the area plan was initially developed. And for me, that creates a very different determining factor around a decision on this, Chair. Obviously, I'm taking Councillor Kelly's word on it, but I know that he wouldn't sit here and say something that was contrary to that. And looking at the photographs such as they are presented, again, I would be of a similar view. I can't see how this couldn't be now integrated in, whereas perhaps in the past when it was a hill before it was a quarry, it may well not have been so well integrated, but clearly now that an opportunity may well have presented itself because it became a quarry and it's been infilled again.
Don't believe there was a question contained within that. It was more of an observation. Is there any further comments or questions, members? So as of yet, there's a recommendation in front of us, and we haven't had Councillor Gallagher.
Just a bit of clarification. It is outside the limits of development from the Glenmorn site, and I know Councillor Kelly talked about the scarcity and land getting lost and all that, but does that have a bearing? Do we need to, if we were going to look to approve this, do we need to have a reallocation of that boundary and a specific clause?
I think that would be on the remit of this meeting in terms of revisiting boundaries, but I think the point that Councillor Kelly was making was that there's an opportunity site here because of the previous history. But I don't know if, John, do you want to come on that?
Yeah, I'll come in there. So it sounds like you're talking about whether the settlement development limits perhaps would be reviewed as part of the review of the local plan. Is that right? No. But
just to clarify, the site is outside the development limit. So that's your question. Definitely outside the development limit, and it's really we've discussed.
See the point I'm talking. See the material concerns. They can override that being outside the development. Question I'm asking.
We don't have a policy that tells you what those reasons might be. If we don't have a particular exceptional test, if that's what you mean, at the moment in regard to development outside a development limit.
Councillor Kelly.
I think, Chair, whether there's a review of the boundary, the application is for a house in the countryside, which is adjacent to the development zone, and it could remain that way, or it could possibly become part of the development zone into the future. That's something we don't know. But just as it stands, I think it can be accepted as a dwelling in the countryside. In that site, I think it can be integrated, given the change in the topography and the development pressures within the village, given that the land to the south along the river is now part of the new floodplain maps, and the land to the north around the chapel site is not available, or not going to be available, and certainly isn't going to be available, as the farmers have made clear, for the next maybe 20 or 30 years. They're not old men, and they're very determined that they're keeping their farm. So these are people in their 50s who could be farming for the next 20 years. So given all of that, and given the scope that's available to us in the area plan to interpret policy a little bit more creatively in the area away from the A5, I think this is an opportunity site, as you've said, and I'm prepared to propose that we don't accept the officer recommendation and instead move to approve this application.
You. Any further comments, members? A proposal on the floor, which has been seconded by Councillor Maguire. So I'm going to just move straight on the vote, members. So there's a proposal from Councillor Kelly to approve the application subject to standard conditions, and seconded by Councillor Maguire. All those in favour? All those against? Abstentions? So that's 9 for, 2 against, and 1 abstention. So that application has been approved. Thank you, members. Members, that's all of the applications that have been dealt with for today's meeting. We have reached the 4-hour threshold, so this meeting will need to be adjourned. There's still a substantial amount of business that would need to be carried on, and we would usually do that tomorrow, the following day. I just want to hear members' thoughts on that. I've been advised that the only options that are available to us is that we continue with this meeting tomorrow, or we adjourn that business till next month's meeting. There's some of those that have time sensitive. There's some of those matters are time sensitive, and I'm just, for instance, the consultation data for Mana and Oma, LDP. But Councillor Boyle.
Yes, there are some matters that clearly are time sensitive, Chair. Not only that, bearing in mind that we're still in open business, but there are also matters in confidential business that may well also be time sensitive. Perhaps the city solicitor may be able to advise how time sensitive they are, but that to me would dictate whether we adjourn to a later date or we go for it again tomorrow.
Philip, do you want to come on and let us know, is there any specific concerns on adjourning the confidential matters until next month? Go ahead.
Could you also answer whether it's possible, now that we've dealt with all the applications, that we can do a virtual meeting to address the issues outstanding, or whether we need to do a chamber meeting?
I posed the same question to the head of planning, because I think it would be a good idea.
Chair.
I've requested that. I felt that was I thought that was a good option if we're meeting next Wednesday for a predetermination hearing, but I've been advised that that wouldn't be acceptable, and the only option is to convene tomorrow, or we meet next month.
It's the protocol not to convene the next day anyways, and I think, I don't know around everyone else, but it's our first session back off recess, so I assumed we were coming to a 2-day meeting anyway.
Is there any chance we can meet earlier tomorrow if it has to be? I'm kind of.
I want to give the city solicitor an opportunity to respond to some of the comments that have been made.
Chair, I don't think there's any prospect of being able to do it during the PDH. I think we want to keep PDHs and council meetings separate. There is no particular urgency, as I understand it, in respect of any of the applications in terms of the enforcement matters. I have a sneaking suspicion, actually, that the consultation response to Fermanagh and Omagh is no longer as time sensitive as it may have been after the FODC council meeting last night, because I know that there was an issue in relation to the consultation that was raised at that, and there's a prospect that that may have been being pulled. So we're left with a fairly small amount of material that needs to be covered. It may be possible to set it up virtually, members. That would require us to liaise with the various departments that are involved in setting up these meetings. If members are minded, to leave that with us, we'll make the inquiries and see if it could be set up virtually for tomorrow afternoon at the same time, and we'll see what we can do.
Members, we're going to leave it at that. We're going to explore the option of having a virtual meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. If that isn't possible, we are going to place the items on the agenda, the remaining items on the agenda at the next month's planning committee meeting. And the scheme, and between times, the scheme of delegation will remain as is. Yeah. Okay. So, and that's seconded by Councillor Dobbins. Okay, Councillor Dobbins. Okay. Yep. Councillor Dobbins. And I'm thinking on those who maybe are travelling longer distances than the likes of myself or yourself, to come to the chamber, and if they're coming to the chamber where there's an opportunity to have the meeting done in virtual.
Chair, if I can assist in relation to that, the timings of committee meetings are fixed in standing orders, so that's not an option, I'm afraid, at the present time.
Councillor Boyles have proposed that we're going to explore having a virtual meeting at 2 o'clock tomorrow, and if we can't be done, we're going to adjourn the business until next month's planning committee meeting. Has that been seconded by Councillor Kelly?